Hello and welcome to our webinar about reducing risk of a nuclear verdict through empowering effective and pre- and post-hire processes. My name is Hayden Cardiff. I'm the founder and co-CEO here at Idelic, and I have the fantastic privilege of being joined by a wonderful guest, and that is Dirk Kupar, co-founder and CEO of TruckRight. So again, thank you all so very much for jumping in here and taking your time to join us today. We're definitely excited about this topic as it touches kind of near and dear to both of our hearts. But obviously, it's something that's also incredibly important and impactful to you and the industry as a whole, especially right now during a time of COVID and how things are shifting. So today, just as a little bit of housekeeping, we want to kind of dive in a little bit on what we're going to be discussing. So first and foremost, we're going to highlight just the general liability that we're seeing within the industry today, and how that affects both the pre-hire process as well as the onboarding process, and then some definite tips and tricks on how to integrate those two processes to really protect yourself against nuclear verdicts. And that's obviously another very high profile issue within the industry. But more than anything else, today we want to be able to provide you some clear insights and some clear next steps on what you can do today to be able to, again, marry those pre and post hire processes and protect yourself against those nuclear verdicts. And so as we go throughout the next hour here, we want your participation as much as possible. So please feel free to reach out, shoot us a question at any point with that, throughout the next hour. We'll try to grab those as we go along, but also leave some time at the end to be able to dive into those questions as well. So before we get rolling here, I do want to again introduce my fantastic guest here. Dirk, do you want to take a few moments to introduce yourself and your company?
Thank you, Hayden. And the first thing I want to say is thank you for bringing me on to your webcast today. Really excited to be here. As the slide in front of us all says, looking at my old mug there, been around the industry a couple of years. My wife and I are co-founders of TruckRight and been involved in it since 2013. And frankly, we married 38 years, and I met my wife when I was a driver. I actually was working for Atlas Van Lines at the time, and I was scheduled to be her mover when she was leaving school. So a little bit of a background there of trucking since day one with our relationship and where we are today.
That's fantastic, and it's great to hear that backstory, Dirk. That's great. And again, my name is Hayden Cardiff. Again, I'm the founder and co-CEO here at Idelic, and what we do as a company is really help to provide tools that allow drivers to come home safely each and every night. We provide a driver management platform that really dives into the why around driver risk, helps fleets understand who's most at risk, understand why, and then really assign corrective action and performance improvement plans to ensure that they, again, improve their safety and are able to get home. And so I'm, again, very excited to have Dirk on as well, because he's not only a fantastic partner of ours at Idelic, but also has a tremendous amount of knowledge around this pre and post hire process, and how fleets can really start to make changes to impact and benefit that. So before I really dive into too much around that pre and post hire side of things, I really want to set the stage just around like what are the stakes here. And I think we generally understand what's at risk, but I think what's being as a fleet manager, as a safety or compliance professional, as a hiring manager, we oftentimes get caught up in the weeds of kind of what that day-to-day process is, and don't necessarily take the time to kind of take a step back and look at kind of what the impact of this has. One, on just the benefits of having good and safe and reliable drivers in your fleet, but two, just the risk and the liability of not doing something correctly throughout this process. And so we've seen time and time again just how nuclear verdicts have started to really creep up and more or less explode onto the scene over the last 8 years, right? We've seen double-digit growth in the number of nuclear verdicts. But the most alarming piece to me, and Dirk, you can kind of chime in on what you've seen on this side as well. But what we've seen is within 100% of the cases where lack of clean driver history was cited as evidence, the fleet lost that nuclear verdict case, right? So each and every time the plaintiff's attorney brought up a lack of driver, lack or dings on that driver's history, and that was used as evidence to get the fleet, like the fleet lost that case. And similarly, we found that 87% of the time where unfavorable hiring practices were cited as evidence against the fleet, that fleet lost their case. And so again, there's obviously something here. Negligence is one of the big driving factors of nuclear verdicts. And so negligent hiring and negligent retention are two major factors in this process. And so Dirk, I want to ask you here, like, what are you seeing from that negligence, especially around the liability standpoint, when it comes to hiring?
Great question. I think one of the things that I think is the plaintiff attorney and how educated they are becoming at digging for really things that are relevant, but not necessarily the root cause of whatever accident that person may have been involved in. And the plaintiff attorney is playing to the fears of the jury and implanting the big bad wolf thing about the trucking company. And the easiest way for them to do that is to look at the negligence in the hiring, looking for holes in the onboarding process. They may have steps in place, and are they doing it 100% of the time?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that we're seeing.
No, I think that's spot on. And I think, taking that a step deeper is just like, there are oftentimes different pieces of this process that we see more than others, where the plaintiff's attorneys really laser in on and ask for and dig into to try to find some kink in the armor. And oftentimes what we find is just being able to see, what those standards are as far as your pre-hire checklist, your pre-hire, criteria, and are you adhering to that? Dirk, what are some of the other things that you've seen as far as steps in this process that that either ding a fleet on that liability or can help protect them in the inverse of that?
So on the help protecting side, we all know we're in an unusual time right now, but that aside, finding drivers is challenging. And basically the drivers that our clients are having approach them may not be the cream of the crop, top of the echelon. So they're looking at a driver who may have some sort of blemish on their background, but still feel the pressure to onboard that driver. The successful fleets have a plan on how to coach and onboard that driver with that blemish and be able to guide them in a good direction to bring that person up to the standards that the individual fleet would have. So being able to work with the person, none of us are perfect, and basically being able to document, and I can't stress that one enough, that you have a process in place to educate and monitor the progression of that onboarded driver.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely key, and we'll dive into that further as we talk about that onboarding and post-hire process. But I think one of the things that you mentioned there is really important, which is you can take a driver, train them, get them up to the standards that you want. But I think one of the things where fleets get into a lot of trouble is having incredibly tight and stringent pre-hire criteria, documenting how incredibly tight and stringent that pre-hire criteria is, and then realizing that they can't ultimately live up to that and be able to meet the needs, or know that, hey, if I can bring a driver who has maybe, most of the areas covered, but one small area that I think is, I think is okay to bring on, let me coach them up on that specific piece. Well, if you have in that pre-hire criteria that they can't have a certain number of moving violations, they can't have a certain, a certain track record or history, but you hire them anyways, knowing that you're going to try to coach them up, that opens you up for that negligence piece. I mean, is that something that you've kind of seen as well, Dirk?
I would totally agree. And that's where, if you're going to bring that person on, you need to have a strategy and plan on how to coach that person up. And I really can't speak to that emphasize that enough of how important that is.
Yeah. And I think just making sure that the documentation of what's in your hiring practices, what's in your safety handbook, all of those things that are those documented kind of living, breathing documents that you're working out of, they've got to be up to date. They've got to be concise. I know we had John Payan, who's a defense attorney in the industry, on for a webinar a few months ago. And he talked about this at length, just saying, like, look, the simpler and more straightforward, the better, because when it comes to your documentation, when it comes to your safety handbook, because if not, it's going to get to a point where you can't keep track of it, and therefore you aren't necessarily, you might be slipping behind on keeping up with, implementing some of those different practices. So I think that's a really, really big piece of all of this. Now, moving on from that, I mean, you've got the understanding of the liability here, right? Millions and millions of dollars per large nuclear verdict are really at stake here. So how do we start down this path, right? So effectively implementing that pre-hire process is going to be really key in laying the foundation and the groundwork. And so, I just want to briefly touch on some of the basics here. So, I want to, open this up. Dirk, can you help us understand, what are some of the different processes, workflows, or data points that you're collecting during this pre-hire process?
I think the clients are really, they've got the list of the PSP, the SID list, the MVRs, the criminal backgrounds, all the different things that are kind of the requirement thing. Then you've got the employment verifications that go out to former employers, and those, for their own reasons, are becoming more vague and more vague. But really, one of the things we see fleets really going more towards these days is a HR sort of philosophy for recruiting and onboarding, where you're actually interviewing a person and going over the fit of culture to bring into an organization. But the data points is a piece of the puzzle, and being able to see if the attitude and aptitude of the candidate is somebody that you feel that they feel is coachable.
Yeah, I really love that, because I think one of the things that being able to actually engage with that driver, you're going to do two things. One, you're going to start to, like you said, understand that fit, which I think is really, really important, especially when fleets are trying to reduce turnover and trying to drive engagement, right? Like, some drivers can be great drivers, but might not have a good fit for you, your culture, how you coach, how you work with your driver managers, your dispatchers. Like, there's just nuance there that it might not fit for everyone. So as you're starting to have a more tailored, more integral approach to interviewing and discussing what they're looking for, what you're looking for, you're going to find a much better fit. And I think the other part, Dirk, which I do want to kind of have you touch on as well, is one of the things that we've found is really important, both from the compliance aspect, but more so just from a retention perspective, is understanding how, as a fleet, you can take notice of, log, and track all of the conversations and discussion points, essentially the promises you're making to a driver in that pre-hire process, so that you can eventually marry that up and hopefully deliver on those promises post-hire. Is that something that you guys have seen as well?
One of the things that we have in our workflow that is configurable by client is to be able to put in standardized questions that is part of the interview. Some of them can be self-served right to the actual candidate, or others can be done in a Zoom meeting like this, where you're recording the expectations from both sides. What are my expectations as the fleet, and what are your expectations as the driver? And being able to document the different questions, but be consistent in what your processes are.
Yeah. And I think that documentation and consistency is key, right? Because as fleet managers, as safety or hiring professionals, as anyone in this industry, like the most precious thing we have is time, right? And like the most scarce resource we have is time. And if we can better optimize that time, we can do so much more and have such a stronger impact. So instead of instead of jockeying around with spreadsheets or paper files, having a system, like you said, Dirk, of being able to consistently and scalably manage that hiring process. And then one of the things that we obviously enjoy is the fact that our two systems integrate together. And so all of the data and insights and knowledge you're collecting in that pre-hire process then gets pushed over to onboarding and the driver managers and dispatchers after the fact, so they can see, again, all of the things that were, all the qualities that you hired the driver for in the first place, as well as tying in the importance of, you know, delivering on those promises on the back end. So I think that's really, really key. So we actually just got a question, and that's very much in line with the conversation here. So I'll throw this out. And it says, what are the most common driver issues when hiring? Is it, you know, is it hiring drivers with accidents, MVR points, no background, you know, no PSPs? Like what are the most common issues that you're seeing? So I'll tee that up for you, Dirk.
Thank you. From the data that we're looking at, job hopping is probably one of the biggest things that our clients are dealing with, where the driver that they're looking to hire has had so many employers in the last 3 or 4 years, and the recruiters have so much pressure to fill the seat that they're taking people without truly looking and delving into why that person may be bouncing from company to company. So our software on the back end, where we can see how many employers a person's had, and we can present that up to a fleet recruiter to let them know that data in real time, to compare one driver versus another, based upon just, again, maybe they've had 12 employers in the last 4 years versus somebody else that's had 2 employers in the last. So be able to just kind of pay attention to, is that person likely going to be a fit? And if somebody has a history of going from fleet to fleet to fleet, there tends to be something you need to delve into and understand better.
Yeah. I think that level of visibility is really key, and being able to understand even things like outside of your normal, like DOT required, right? Like getting your drug test and your MVR and the, you know, pulling together your DQ file, like all of those things obviously are incredibly important. And there's process and structure to do that consistently, do that to where it doesn't feel like it's a drag on the driver or an issue for your staff or team. But I think things like what you just mentioned are really important. Things like, you know, has this driver been jumping from fleet to fleet? And what is a good standard that I've seen success with, right? So being able to track, you know, who you consider your good, successful, and positive drivers, and where they benchmark against others as they start to come in. Like that level of analytics and that level of detail is going to help you, again, not only be consistent, but improve that process. And that kind of ties into, you know, the next kind of topic that I want to discuss, Dirk, is what does good look like, right? I think we all, you know, I think a lot of the listeners out there will kind of attest, like we are in the trenches, we're diving in, we're trying to do, you know, everything we can to improve. But like a lot of times it's difficult to understand what good actually looks like. So I mean, my first question to you is, you know, how do you know your pre-hire process is actually successful, and kind of what metrics should fleets be tracking to understand that?
Retention. You can't really measure anything better than retention. Frankly, if fleets had high retention and low turnover, a lot of this would go away, because it's just proven the longer an employee or an owner operator is with one carrier, the more efficient they are and less likely they're going to be into a situation that could be costly.
Yeah.
One of the big matrices we see fleets tracking for cost of turnover is what was the cost of the accident in the first 6 months of a new hire, because that number is exponentially higher than the rest of the fleet.
Yeah. Yeah, and being able to, so I think that's that retention piece, and I think you started to dive into another aspect. I think it's really important, like banding out your driver tenure and starting to compare other metrics that are also important to you, like your claims ratios, loss ratios, like all of those, and accident rates, all those different pieces banded by driver tenure is going to help give you a better, more clear picture of, are you hiring better drivers? Looking at that year over year, month over month, to see, you know, are your standards going up or down? But then also, one of the things that I think is also important during that pre-hire process is just measuring velocity. Like how many touch points are you engaging with your drivers? How long, I guess, what's the lag time between each touch point? How many different forms, how many different pieces of content do drivers have to engage with to be able to, get hired? onto, within your fleet, and then tracking those types of metrics and making sure that you can consistently try to improve those different touch points.
One of the things that we see is onboarding from fleet to fleet really becomes unique to what their operations are. People that are in the food handling space, there tends to be more regulation that they need to pay attention to. People that are in flatbed sort of work or pneumatics, there's special equipment that they're working on. So the commonality is your program has to be the fleet's program has to be unique and to them specifically. There are common things across the board, but generally speaking, you can't take your neighbor down the road who's got 200 trucks just because you have 200 trucks and mirror what they do. If they're onboarding flatbed drivers and you're hauling refrigerated and you try to mirror each other, you're just not going to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, because I think that also ties back into that negligence and that overall liability side of things, right? Like if you just copy and paste your hiring practices from your buddy down the street who has a fleet that's similar in size, you're opening yourself up to a lot of issues. So when talking about that negligence, especially with knowing that negligence is the biggest driver for those nuclear verdicts within court, right? Like, how can we ensure our pre-hire processes actually meet the standards that we want to set for our fleet?
Again, one of the things I mentioned earlier is a shift towards HR getting trucking. I've been in the trucking game for some time. Onboarding used to be somebody handing you keys and telling you to go down the road. Then fleets started having safety guys that would hand you keys and tell you to go down the road. Then we got into a point where recruiters would recruit and sell you to come work there without maybe giving you good information. Every other company besides trucking has HR to onboard and understands and are informed of what onboarding rules are.
Yeah. From
fair credit reporting, like a lot of fleets just pay attention to DOT and don't pay attention to fair credit reporting or EEOC. Like, are we doing things properly? So it's a holistic view that you have to take a look at. One of the things that scares me the most when I go into a new client is they've got the checklist.
Yeah.
But whoever read the checklist didn't really look at the checklist of, this person had 12 employers last year and we still hired them?
Yeah.
But they've got the checkbox, the employment verifications are done. They've got the checkbox, PSP is done.
Yeah. That's such an important point, is just like, some basic level of understanding, like it's not just checking the box to check the box because that's what DOT requires, but an understanding of, hey, like as a process and as a program, I want to set certain standards, and the standards are here because of data that's indicated to me, like this is what's going to help us improve. We actually just got another question in that's right in line with that. And so, they asked, so job hopping is a common problem when hiring. So what is a good standard to reject or accept an application? 2, 3, 5 employers in the last 3 years? Like what have you seen as far as some of the more, I guess, egregious metrics in that arena? I mean, and knowing that this is probably not going to be necessarily a hard and fast, but like looking at, hey, if it's over this, it's probably a red flag.
Anybody that has more than one job a year over 3 years, to me, would really raise my eyebrows, and I would be looking for reasonings behind it. If somebody's out of the Midwest and hauls sugar beets and they're on a cycle that has 4 or 5 different companies doing that and it's not a year-round job, then you look at it. But if the person's working in a reputable company, you can tell that by looking at who the employers are, and they're going more often, and it's always in the background, in the interview with the driver, it's, well, they're always treating me bad, or this one's always lying to me. So I don't think the number is as important as the actual interaction with the why that number is where it's at.
Yeah. And I think that harkens right back to the the idea of like actually engaging with HR and actually having more of a sit down conversation interview with your drivers, which I know for a lot of fleets that's difficult because of the sheer volume and number of drivers that they need to hire, especially in this day and age with the driver shortage and with turnover and COVID and all these different pieces. Like it's hard, but obviously there are tools out there to make both the pre-hire and the post-hire and the safety, all these different pieces. There's tools that make that easy. And obviously that's why we're diving in today. But I think that's a big piece of it. We actually just got more, I think more of a comment, more as far as a discussion point from another listener. It's just, I think one of the other metrics that I think one other metric is the difference in non-preventable or preventable accidents and what the telematics are telling you about that driver's behavior. So how are you using the telematic data to positively affect your driver behavior? Are you using it as a positive coaching experience? I think that to me are two big points, right? So talking about, how do you measure effective, pre-hire data, pre-hire process, right? Is when you start to see that those newer tenure band of drivers, right? So those been there for a couple months, 6 months to a year, right? Those drivers are starting to improve, year to year, month to month, on their accident rates, their preventables or non-preventables. Looking at telematics or camera events, right? Obviously, that's where we as Idelic really help out and benefit is helping to understand the progress and the process of integrating all those different telematic sources, the accidents, the claims, injuries, the work comp, all those different pieces to help give a holistic view of driver performance, driver risk, and then track how that's going, be able to help assign things to help improve that. So I think that's a fantastic point. Those are other good metrics to look at. So that kind of tees up a really good transition to kind of that other side, right? So if you're going through a good pre-hire process, you also have that onboarding process as well. And so first off, what does that look like? There's so many different, I think there's a lot of different facets to this that I think people can kind of get a little bit of whiplash a little bit when trying to kind of manage that onboarding, especially when you're trying to do it so quickly, get drivers active and running and productive and profitable, right? Like all that's really important. But, I think breaking it down to understanding kind of like the two sides of onboarding, right? Like you have the compliance side, and then you have like the training and culture dissemination, right? So compliance and paperwork and making sure all of your, T's are crossed, I's are dotted, all, driver is fit to work. All those different pieces from that onboarding are really, really important. That's where, a lot of that transition that we'll talk about from pre-hire to post-hire is going to come into play. And then you've also got the other side of that coin, which is the training, the culture, helping them understand how you do things, the nuance of your fleet, the type of equipment that you run, the type of ELDs that you have, what systems are in the truck, like all of those things, just like expectations and, getting them disseminated into your fleet and your culture, all that's really, really important. But knowing that those are kind of two different kind of paths that need to get done in conjunction is also really important. Obviously for small and mid-sized fleets, it's generally the same team, sometimes even the same person doing all of that. And we understand that. But then, larger fleets, those are oftentimes broken into multiple different teams, multiple different processes. And so it's within this onboarding, effective process really helps to address quickly taking the information that was disseminated in that pre-hire into the onboarding of the compliance and the paperwork and getting them up and running and able to drive, while also training that driver on everything around their new job, right? Delivering on the promises that you made in that pre-hire process and really not doing double work when in a time-consuming and error-prone manner within that handoff. So Dirk, what are some of the things that you've seen as well as far as effective onboarding?
I think effective onboarding has to start, and again, the best practice fleets that we interact with, is making sure that the people that are actually onboarding have the right mentality and mindset to be welcoming, to be able to express the culture of safety, to express the culture of training, buy into the technology and be able to present that technology in a positive. There's nothing that will turn a person off in an orientation room faster, and I've seen this where you've got the trainer in front of a class, and he'll say something, and then out of his words, that's because this is how we do it, but we know it's not really like that once you get out in the real world. The message has to be bought into, and the fleets that we see the most success with that are actually having the trainers and the safety people involved in the decision-making of the technologies that they're using.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, let's talk about training the trainer for a second, because I think you brought up a really important part, Derek, and that is the buy-in. A lot of times we focus on the drivers, and that's obviously important. We need to have good standards. We need to hire to our standards. We need to make sure that we're bringing on the best candidates. That's all incredibly important. But man, doing that becomes so much easier if you have good buy-in and good, well-trained staff around onboarding, orientation, and driver managers or dispatchers. Like, those frontline people are so important to this process, whether it's retention, whether it's onboarding, whether it's safety. Those people are the ones that make or break it on the whole in the long run, right? Because so what we've found as effective with our customers is being able to kind of leverage our tool to be able to help them consistently and process with a strong process orientation, be able to onboard those drivers, have task management and performance, onboarding plans get kicked out every time a new driver gets hired. So the driver managers, the orientation managers see exactly what they need to do, when, what they need to talk to them about. So all of those different pieces from that onboarding perspective. And I think that, because that's the part that's going to really tie a driver in to your brand, tie them into your culture. And, obviously the compliance and the paperwork and getting them up to date on all of that is really important. I do not want to downplay that at all. But from a driver's perspective, that's the stuff that's not the fun stuff, right? They want to be able to get behind that truck and start driving. They want to be able to start making money, but they want to be able to understand you as a fleet, what your culture is, what you care about. And to Dirk's point, man, if you've got a driver manager or an orientation manager that's up there saying, hey, let me read off this checklist, but that's not how it actually is. We don't really care about that much. Like, you're totally discrediting that entire process. And so if you can have a strong manager training program, but also invest in tools that will allow those driver managers or onboarding professionals to have consistent, scalable process to nail home every single time, they will be much, much more effective in that process. Dirk, have you seen that as well?
I do. It's really, in today's onboarding, the communication, the message has to be concise and clear. When I go into fleets, one of the early questions they ask is, can you point to me the person in the building who's responsible for driver problems or the driver retention? And proactive fleets will point to themselves as an individual and say that everybody here owns it. Whereas reactive fleets will point to that person in the corner office. That's Barbara's job. She does driver retention.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point where it's easy to say, hard to do, right? But it's one of those things where, like, when you see it, you know it, right? And drivers can sniff that out so quickly when they start to see people pass the buck and not really take that on. And so we actually just got a question, and I think that's very in line with what we're talking about. So do you feel that as a part of onboarding that it's important for new drivers to actually meet his or her driver manager or dispatcher throughout that onboarding process, to be able to interact and ask questions? and interact with that manager or dispatcher. My goodness, absolutely. In anywhere possible, even in a virtual setting now, right? Anytime that a new driver can meet their dispatcher or driver manager as quickly as possible in this process, the better, because that's where that rapport needs to start. And the driver, if you have a good driver manager or a good dispatcher, they should be excited to meet that new driver. They should be your biggest advocates. They should be your biggest cheerleaders as a company to say, hey man, you made a great choice in coming on board with us. I'm here to work with you. This is exactly what we're going to do. And again, having a tool like Safety Suite and tied into TruckRight, you can now have all of that automated in a lot of different ways to give your driver managers, dispatchers the I guess arm them with the things necessary to be able to make that a consistent and scalable process. So yes, absolutely. Dirk, I mean, you feel the same way on that?
100%. A good driver manager, one of the early things they communicate is your success to the driver is your success is my success, and we're here for each other. The dispatcher can't work without the driver can't work without the dispatcher, and the closer that relationship is and the more you can foster it, the better. And again, sometimes that is over electronic devices, sometimes it's face-to-face, but the communication of who do I interact with, and people don't quit companies, people quit people.
Yeah.
And if you have a rapport with that person, you're going to be able to identify a lot faster if there is a problem with that rapport.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, in talking about that onboarding process, again, I think metrics are really, really key to be able to understand like how we're doing and what we should be focusing on, right? If you can measure it, you can improve it. Those, that I think, we obviously adhere pretty strongly to that. I know our customers who do see the benefit from that. So effectively measuring that onboarding process, like what does that look like? I know a couple of the things for us, are generally, again, the speed in which you can really bring that driver in, have them talk to their managers, get them through get them through the compliance side of things. But man, one of the things that we oftentimes, caution against is we've had fleets who've tried to rush them through a training program just to get them out on the road. And yes, you want to get them productive, but you also want to make sure that they're getting assimilated into and trained up on their new role in the best way, because there's a difference between like speed and like performance. And so we found a lot of good measures by getting drivers behind the wheel quickly, but then giving them good touch points. And so like the number of touch points you can have with the driver in the first 3 months, that's a great metric. And again, you can see that, track that in tools like Safety Suite to be able to understand what is where you're lying within that, and be able to kind of dive through those different onboarding and more importantly training perspectives. Dirk, what are some of the things that you guys have seen, especially with customers leveraging TruckRight and kind of within that process?
Again, the communication and meeting expectations. Our system auto generates out to the drivers at intervals based upon the client's needs, interactions with the driver based upon the expectations from onboarding, and the system can send them from HR or payroll or from safety to target specific things of concern to the driver and make sure that expectations are being met ongoing. From the touch points that fleets are looking at and making sure, are we giving you, are you getting enough miles? Are you making yourself available enough? Are your deliveries on time? Are you reliable? So that there's things that, again, early in the onboarding, if you see things that may not meet your initial expectations, it may just be a matter of communicating with the driver. What exactly why aren't you available Monday or Sunday afternoon? You're always available Monday morning. you're not going to get the income you're looking for if you're not available. And maybe childcare has become a problem. There's so many variables, but you need to have that communication to understand it.
Oh, great. That's a great segue into the integration of those two pieces, that pre-hire and that post-hire kind of onboarding side of things. And so, within this, again, that integration, what does success look like? What does a strong handoff look like? What should fleet operations look like on a day-to-day basis? Man, I think this is something that's really important for fleets to dive into and have a good firm grasp on, because I think this is a part that we've seen a lot of people struggle with. And so you have all of this data and information and insights and process that you're going through to bring a driver all the way to, okay, hit the button, we're going to hire them, we want to get them going, all, from that point to, okay, now they're ready to drive, up and going. Now we're coaching them, training them, managing them, making sure they're safe, making sure they're on the road. Like, there's generally a gap there. So how does that integration and how does the handoff work? What does it look like? I think one of the first things that comes to mind for me is really, again, kind of going back to what you mentioned, Dirk, of just having that good expectation set and then being able to deliver on those expectations through a fantastic training and onboarding experience. I mean, Dirk, what are some of the things that you all have seen as far as what a good kind of integration of these two processes look like?
I think one of the things that I see that I quite admire in fleets is where recruiting or safety, depends on where the handoff ends up going on to operations, is where the people that are doing the handoff actually have the time to sit in that department to see what the reception is like, what does it feel like, and what is the interaction once that handoff has happened, so that they can see if there's any deficiencies on what they're setting up when they're getting ready to do the handoff. So having your people be able to sit in a department to see what it is like for the first X period of time when a driver has moved on. So again, not so much cross training, but I am, the fleets that I am the most impressed with really invest in their people, the office people, the drivers themselves, and the communication that flows. And best way to do that is to have people sit in that. Whether you have a dispatcher go out on a run with a driver, you have a marketing person go out and see what it's like at a shipper or receiver. So really holistically being able to see what are we actually delivering, and can we be honest with our delivery?
Yeah, I think that I guess empathy that you can build within your entire team of understanding exactly what people go through within that onboarding process really helps to make sure that the handoff there is strong. I think the other piece that we've seen a lot of our customers have success with is making sure that the systems and the data and the processes are also integrated. Not, when it comes to, hey, like during applicant tracking and that whole pre-hire process, you're gathering a lot of information, whether it be from the driver, from the different forms, from notes and conversations. That all should be incredibly informative to how you tailor specific onboarding and onboarding programs for that driver, right? So you're losing so much fantastic insight into how to best engage this driver and keep that driver for the long haul if you lose that. And so being able to marry up that with what's going on post-hire, oftentimes being two systems, that pre-hire and that post-hire, especially when it comes to like the training and corrective action and prescriptive coaching and things like that when it comes to safety and risk management. Man, like being able to have that data feed from one place to another is incredibly important. And I think that's why, we've obviously had some good success with mutual customers as well, seeing that integration between, Idelic and TruckRight. But I think having that tie-in, that link, whether it's through a dedicated system or whether it's internally, it doesn't matter. Like the data needs to flow through consistently so you can have the insights that inform what you do during that post-hire process. And I think that's key. So having data obviously is important, but making sure that it informs actual decisions. Like if I know a driver is really excited about certain routes or certain times or certain certain aspects of the job, man, I'm going to really key in on that during the onboarding process, really highlight some of the things that make us unique as a company that tie into those different aspects. Like that is going to make that driver feel accepted in a part of a culture where they feel like they're being watched after and not watched over. I think that's really, really key.
Really like that statement, Hayden. That was well worded.
Absolutely. So that's a big that's a big point. That's a big point and a big part of the making sure the drivers stay for the long haul. So it looks like we actually just got another question. Is there a lot of talk about successful onboarding? No, there is a lot of talk about successful onboarding process. What about post-hire methods to successfully retain the best driver? What's working? That is a fantastic question. And I think one of the things, and I can I'll tee this up for you here as well, Dirk. But I think one of the things that we're seeing is obviously being able to be prescriptive in both your onboarding training, but also your kind of post-hire training and engagement, right? And what I mean by that is when you have drivers who get into negative events, and then you have to come down on them because like it is after the fact, right? It is a dramatically different conversation when a driver gets into an accident or gets in, has not been meeting expectations further along in the process, and you say, look, you've got to ship up or you're not going to be here any longer, right? Like that conversation is much different when you can take all of the information and insight that you gained around his or her, likes, dislikes, what they're looking for in the job, their behavior, their process, their telematics, their accidents, claims, injuries, all those different things, and be prescriptive about that to say, hey, let me jump in here before it becomes a major issue. And now your driver managers and your dispatchers can be armed with insights to say, look, hey, here's some of the things that we're seeing. Let's dive in and try to coach based off of those things, and and get you to a point where you can go home safe, or you can be productive, you can make more money, you can be more effective at your job, right? So having a way and a tool to be able to allow you to be proactive and engage with your drivers, as opposed to simply reactive, managing spreadsheets and managing, just kind of playing catch up and always just trying to put out fires. That's some of the things that we've seen to best engage and retain drivers. Dirk, what about you?
I think, and as much as we're both in the data business, I'm a truck driver first, and my brain always goes back to treat people the way I want to be treated. And there are times we all need coaching, whether it's the boss or whether it's a frontline worker. How you deliver that coaching from a people's perspective is really going to speak to the effectiveness of the coaching. And it really doesn't outline or highlight what my product is or does, but for me, what's the most important thing when it comes to coaching is the attitude of the deliverer of the coaching.
Yeah. That is so key. And we've heard that time and time again. So I thank you for that. Spot on. Because one of the things that we've actually heard from customers, going back probably, 8 months now is, hey, one of the things that we definitely focus on is being able to leverage all of the data around that driver's behavior to be able to provide a watch list using machine learning and AI to understand who's most at risk to get into an accident. Now, and that's helpful, but Dirk, to your point, it doesn't have as much impact if you can't explain why. If you can't get buy-in from your drivers and your driver managers to help understand, why am I training this driver? What am I training them on? Like, what's the purpose for this, right? So one of the things that we've recently done is actually peel back the black box a little bit with that machine learning side of things to be able to understand how much each individual event, whether it's a telematic event, FMCSA violation, accident, claim, injury, customer complaint, whatever the case is, all of that gets filtered in And then now you can really understand how much each of those events contributes to that safety score, so you can get to a better understanding of the why. And I think that's really, really key for driver managers, dispatchers, but also the drivers themselves. Is with that clarity, you can now feel confident in what you're training them on. You can feel confident that the driver is going to understand why they need training in the first place. And again, you can tailor the message, like you said, Dirk, tailor the message of advocacy with that driver. Hey, we're on the same side here. You want to get home safe. You want to be productive. You want to make more money. We want you to do all of those things. We're very much aligned in this process. Here's, let's dive in and help coach you to that point. And so I love this. There's a lot of really good questions coming in. I want to actually grab another one of these. And Dirk, this will be a good one for both of us, the tag team as well. It says, okay, what is the best process to follow up with safety performance history reports and at the same time expedite the driver's hiring? How do you follow up with these, and what is the best process to ensure compliance? Dirk, do you want to jump into that?
Well, I could, but it'll sound like a plug. Safety performance. We run a call center doing safety performance investigation for our clients, and frankly, giving them an unbiased third-party view of what that looks like. So there's the plug. But let's just get back to it. How do you process it, manage it? Things have to happen in parallel, where you're doing different actions in the hiring process in parallel. And when the safety performance reports are in front of you to look at, they need to be looked at. They need to be read. They need to be understood. And if you have a admin person looking at them, do they really understand what they're looking at? So again, back to training your people is important.
Yeah. I think that's key. And Dirk, I'm glad you threw that plug out there, because it's important for people to know. Again, because like what we found is fleets understand oftentimes that their processes are getting them where they're at today, but there's an ideal workflow that they would love to get to, but oftentimes it's just that change is too much of too high of a hill to climb. And so knowing that there are tools or processes or people out there or vendors out there that can help them make that change easier is obviously a key part. And I think one of the things that you mentioned as well is all of that information that you're gathering and helping your fleets understand for that performance history report, as well as all of the driver's hiring needs, all of that flows into Safety Suite through that integration to be able to leverage that data for that driver moving forward when it comes to understanding risk moving forward, understanding training and all those different pieces. So I think that's a huge piece there as well. And so, man, ton of great questions coming in. I'd much rather answer these than kind of dive into to kind of some other pieces that kind of the pre-scripted. But we've got another great question here. As a part of retention and increasing individual driver income, do you feel it's necessary to have a gain sharing or safety incentive program that rewards excellent safe driving behavior and is meeting certain metrics? That is a fantastic question. So let me dive in. We actually put out a blog post fairly recently about this, especially and kind of aligning or do's and don'ts if you're going to have a gain share or incentive program. Obviously, if you have, we are big proponents of recognition programs, because that helps the driver, again, feel like they're a part of your culture. Now you've got to be committed to what, the pros and the cons of some of these different aspects. Like if you have a gain share program that's very binary, you either get it or you don't, then you run the risk of, early on in the period, whether it's a quarter, whether it's a year, early on in that period, if they don't meet that expectation, then they could check out, right? They could mentally say, I don't have, I'm not going to make my safety bonus or, make my percentage. And so there's no use in me trying to continue to perform well. That also, could bode, poorly for retention. But if you have a nice scale that the more I try, the better I do, then absolutely gain sharing, safety incentive programs are very effective, and a really good way of helping drivers stay engaged and helping them earn more. And as a fleet, you're much more accepting and being able to provide some cash benefits and bonus for a driver who's safer, because that's saving you so much more on the back end of that. One of the things that we've found, though, is that recognition generally does a ton when it comes to, you get a lot of value out of recognition programs. And that could be a jacket or a hat or a pen, a shirt, something that allows drivers to show their peers that they were able to gain that recognition, that we're able to gain that next kind of tier and kind of set themselves apart from their peers. I think that's been something that has paid a lot of dividends within the safety and the engagement within that fleet. Dirk, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it is important to have a design that is designed for success, and the success is exactly to your point, is a way for a person, even if they have an unfortunate situation at one period of time, that there is a way to gain back something so that you don't drive them into giving up for a period of time or becoming discouraged with it. So the design is paramount for its success.
Yeah.
I tell fleet owners all the time, if you're going to put a safety program in place, design it to pay the money. Not design. So many fleets design it for ways to take the money away.
Yeah, I think that's key. Absolutely. I mean, if you create a program, you should want to be able to give those bonuses, right? Like, it should be that, like, you should be there pleading and begging your drivers, meet the milestones, hit the metrics. Please, I want to give you that recognition. I want to give you that benefit. And if you have that mentality, it will generally succeed. And I think that's very, very keen. So we've got a couple minutes left here, Dirk. I want in just a minute or two, what are your final takeaways of what fleets can do right now, today, coming away from this webinar, to be able to reduce the risk and liability from that, pre and post hire process standpoint?
I would suggest the first thing all fleets need to do, and on a regular basis, not just today, but is evaluate their onboarding process, and is it meeting today's needs within your organization, and have a plan to review it on a interval that it makes sense to your organization. It's not one of those things, well, it's done, we've got that, and it's good for the next 20 years. It should be looked at, just like you have to do an annual review on a driver. Are they who we want going up and down the road based upon criteria? You should be looking at your onboarding process and making sure that it meets today's needs of your organization. So that'd be the first thing I would recommend. Get your workflow in place based upon the type of drivers that you're onboarding.
I think that's spot on. And I think my I guess first and foremost, my suggestion and advice would be something that piggybacks right on top of that, which is consistently evaluate your documented handbooks and process and protocols, whether it's in that pre-hire process or in your safety programs. Evaluate those documented processes, because if you are not meeting those standards consistently, and if you cannot prove that you are meeting those standards consistently, you will get into trouble when it comes to liability around negligence. Plaintiffs' attorneys, like you said, Dirk, are smarter and wiser now than they ever have been before at finding those little pieces that they can dig into to find you negligent, right? And so if you can button up those documented handbooks and processes and make sure you regularly audit and consistently can prove your compliance to those things, man, you are going to be in a much better place, but also just be able to sleep much more soundly at night. And I think, and there are obviously tools and providers out there that can help you do that. But I mean, that's as the biggest takeaway from my end. That's what I would say. So, Dirk, we're at the top of the hour here. Fortunately, we were able to answer a ton of questions along the way. I want to thank each and every one of you who've participated and who've listened in. We really appreciate it. Hopefully, you were able to take away some fantastic insights that you can, again, start to implement from today moving forward. So again, I really appreciate everyone's participation. Dirk, especially to you, thank you for taking your time to jump in here and help us understand a lot of these different pieces. We really, really appreciate it.
I thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to your audience for participating and listening. The questions were awesome.
Absolutely. And as always, if you have any further questions or want to reach out to Dirk or myself, please feel free. I know idelic.com is a great resource. Feel free to reach out to me personally, Hayden at idelic.com. We try to make it easy. Dirk, where can people find more information about you and TruckRight?
Truckright.com, TruckRight.com, and I'm Dirk at Truckright.com.
Oh man, look at that. Nice and easy. Well, everyone, again, thank you so much for taking the time. And as always, please stay safe out there. And we look forward to hearing from you here in the future. Thank you all again.